All right, we are live. Remodelers on the Rise with Kyle Hunt. It is Thursday, March 25th, and this is going to be the last show for the next little bit. Spring break is next week, and I'm taking the week off. Turns out I think I am going to enjoy taking a little bit of a break. I hope you have some breaks in mind. It's okay to take a half a day off sometimes, people. It's okay to take a day off sometimes, people. Schedule it, plan it, and make it happen. There is a level of workload and stress that so many of you have been experiencing. The industry is very busy. The springtime starts to get even busier, and you need to make sure that you take care of yourself. So don't be afraid to take some time off. I'm looking forward to that. Michael, I was being dramatic there, and this is the last show for the next little bit. Nancy says, "Hi, Kyle. Good, because it looks like you need a break." I was just on the phone with Nancy, and she's like, "How you doing?" We're just talking about some things, and part of that is what I'm going to talk about today. And I said, you should comment and say, "Boy, it looks like you need a break." And she took me seriously there. There we go. At least 1 month off every year. Good. And you need to design your business in order to do that. All right, rock and roll. So we've got some here that says, come on, there we go. Know your numbers, fundamentals. Know your numbers, fundamentals. Couple things. I took some notes here. One more thing on that vacation thing. I don't know if you guys are like this, but the last couple days before vacation are usually pretty stinking busy. And my schedule this week, and in particular today and tomorrow, is full to the brim. And when your schedule is like that, one of the things that is always helpful to me is wherever you are, be there. It's a Jim Rohn quote. There's also scripture that talks about, do not worry about tomorrow. Today has enough worry and concern of its own. Wherever you are, be there. When we are thinking about the thing we need to get done, or, I need to make that call back, or I'm worried about this afternoon, we are not fully present and in the moment and where we are. So I think that's a helpful thing to keep in mind is wherever you are, be there, focus on one thing at a time, work hard to limit distractions, and serve the person in front of you. Frankly, when you really look at my schedule and what I got to get done the next couple of days, doing a Remodelers on the Rise show today, could have been something to cut out, but people expect it. It is perhaps sometimes an encouraging thing for you, a helpful thing, and it helps me. It's something that I do to serve the people that are watching this, whether live, which go ahead and click a little like or comment so I know you're there, or in the recording. And it's a commitment that I've made, and sometimes we just got to live out our commitments. So wherever you are, be there, take one thing at a time, work hard to limit distractions, and that a lot of times calms us down. Okay, good. The next thing I want to talk about, chime. Maybe I'll start doing that. Instead of hearing that, I'll just go chime. That sounds more obnoxious, though. It's not quite as smooth. Hi, Chris Mosley. And Rum-2. What does that mean? If you go to StreamYard.com/Facebook, I can see who wrote that. I will also click this button. But I do not know what Rum-2 means. Can you please elaborate? Next thing I wanted to mention is that we compare ourselves too much to other people. We compare ourselves too much to other people. And what that can do is increase stress, anxiety, feelings of failure, you feeling like you're not as far along as you should be. Well, look at that person. They're doing this and they've got that. Yeah, they've been at it for another 18 years. Why don't you shut up, work like you're working and you're kicking butt for another 18 years and watch where you are then? We compare ourselves too much and it's to our detriment. You are running a race. You have the skills that you have, the team that you have the vision for your business that you have, the vision for your life. Did you know that there's really successful business people that you might look at and compare yourself to that have miserable marriages? Do you know that there's people that you hold in high esteem, but when you look at the complete picture, their life's a mess? Therein lies an example of, we read a book, by the cover, and we judge a book by the cover. You don't know what's going on in other people's lives. Yes, we can be encouraged by when we look at where other people are and ideas that they have. But so often, and the reason I bring it up is I've had this conversation with clients, several times this week, is that a lot of times when we compare ourselves, we feel beat up. We feel inadequate. And you don't know what's going on in their lives. We don't, right? People could put a good foot forward. There's things we can learn from so many people, but realize that you need to enjoy your journey. You need to enjoy where you're at. You need to make sure that all of your joy or excitement about your business is not tied up in like, well, when I get there, then I'll be happy. We've got to enjoy the process of building a business. It's good to be encouraged when we see somebody making progress, but don't compare yourself so much that you get so frustrated and downtrodden. I think I need to hear that sometimes. I think everybody needs to hear that sometimes. And I think on the other reason it's kind of getting brought up is through the Remodelers Community Facebook group. When people ask questions, when people start getting feedback, it can all of a sudden, in a good way, make you think, am I doing it wrong? Is there a better way to do this? Maybe I should try that. Maybe I should qualify that lead on the phone a little bit differently. Maybe I should do that initial meeting via Zoom instead of in person. That might be a time saver. Maybe I should evaluate how I'm presenting my estimate and how I break it down to people. Should I be doing capacity-based markup instead of volume-based markup? Sometimes seeing all of these different ideas can be helpful. It can challenge our thought process. It can challenge how we approach things. But also, when we start comparing ourselves, you might not be ready for something yet. You might just need to continue to do it the way you're doing it and really solidify that. You might need to get some additional fundamentals in place before you go on to graduate or doctorate level type approaches. And so this comparison and seeing a lot of examples, it can be a healthy thing and a good thing and an encouraging thing. But for some reason this week, I've had multiple conversations where it's been a defeating thing. It's felt bad to people. So focus on your race, learn from others, get new ideas, work to incorporate new things, but don't do it to the detriment of feeling like you're doing it all wrong and everything's bad. So I just wanted to share that. Ramdas wrote the book, Be Here Now on Spirituality. Children of the 1960s recognize the name You're Too Young. That is true. I am too young. Although I'm feeling a lot more of my clients are now younger than me. I don't know how this happened. But I used to just work with old people. Now I'm working with people that are younger than me. I don't know what's going on. Okay. Next up, chime. We'll try that chime thing. Let me know if you prefer that. Know Your Numbers Fundamentals. I am doing a course that starts on April 21st. It's got a clever title, How to Make More Money in Your Remodeling Business. Do I have your attention? How to make more money in your remodeling business. And the coaching that I'm going to do as part of it is mostly coaching that I primarily focus on in my one-on-one work. I've rarely done a course that's kind of around this. And in today's show, I just wanted to talk about when you think of knowing your numbers, when you think of really understanding your financials, what does that look like? What are some of the fundamentals of that? What are some of the fundamentals of that? So I want to just kind of talk through that a bit. When I have, I have an interesting vantage point of working with people who are very beginner in this, who are kind of getting it, who are more intermediate. I've worked with people that really have this stuff down pat, and it's more little tweaks and they're kind of expert level. So I have kind of a unique, I think, role and responsibility and insight into, I'm talking to people, whoever's listening to this, I'm talking to people on a wide spectrum of skills. And sometimes I have to teach down to the basic fundamentals. The good news is, even if you're kind of a little more advanced in this knowledge, it's still good to be reminded of fundamentals and details. It helps sharpen your thinking. But a lot of times when you're talking about fundamentals, the real value is to people who really don't have it sorted out yet and figured out yet in their head. So a couple things related to know your numbers and fundamentals. And what I'm going to kind of do is just go through the course outline that I'm going to be doing for 15 remodelers starting on April 21st, and just kind of go through the different areas that we're going to go through, because it's really the core fundamentals. So one of the first things that all remodelers need to be able to do is really understand how to read their profit and loss statement, how to read this sometimes mysterious profit and loss statement. I've gone through, at this point, hundreds of P&L statements for remodelers. And one of the first things that need to happen is just a thorough understanding of the different categories. And those different categories start out with total sales at the top. The next section is cost of goods sold. This is anything related to producing that job, materials, trade partners, in-house labor. Okay. And there's a variety of things that some people also put into cost of goods sold, project management being one of them. Other people, when they're not able to easily apply project management time to specific jobs, they end up putting project management in the overhead expenses. There's multiple ways to go about it. That's how I see it the majority of the time. Okay. And we've got all of our cost of goods sold right there. After cost of goods sold, when you're reading your profit and loss statement, you have gross profit. Gross profit. You as a remodeler need to understand what gross profit is. And all it simply is total sales minus cost of goods sold, gross profit. The next section of your P&L statement is overhead expenses. Overhead expenses, marketing, advertising, some of your truck and expenses, business insurance, rent, those types of things, overhead expenses. And then down at the bottom, we have net profit. We have net profit. And part of understanding your P&L statement is, one, understanding each of those sections. Two, understanding some of the little particulars, such as you look at your net profit down at the bottom, but if you as an owner took owner draw money from the business, that actually comes off of net profit. If you're an S Corp and you take a salary, that's actually going to show up either in overhead expenses, most likely, or in cost of goods sold. So there's some studying, there's some understanding that we need to have to dig into the profit and loss statement. Okay. So when we think of know your numbers fundamentals, we need to understand how a P&L statement works. And for the great majority of remodelers, especially ones that haven't really dug into this too much, there's some finagling and moving of categories so that they're properly categorized. It is not rare for me to look at a profit and loss statement for a remodeler who's still working on knowing their numbers and to see a cost of goods sold percentage of 30%. A cost of goods sold percentage of 30%. I don't know what kind of markup that would be, but it's a very, very high one if that's the case. Okay, it's wrong. When you a remodeler who has a cost of goods sold percentage of 30%, their P&L statement is set up wrong. Okay, so a lot of times after you really understand the different pieces of it, the next step is to move it into appropriate categories, get it organized. And as a remodeler, you should be able to pull up your P&L statement, have a meeting with me, kind old Kyle, I'll be nice about it. And you should be able to explain to me each of those line items. If you're not able to do that, people that are watching live, people that are watching the recording, yeah, I see you as well, people that are listening to this on the actual audio podcast. If you're not able to do that, you need to work to do that. You need to be able to clearly explain your P&L statement. All right, so that is one of the fundamentals. Gross profit, the profit that you don't yet have, Michael says. Oh, and Bailey, look at her. She's right hooking. I'm going to right hook this. Oh, you think this stuff that Kyle's talking about is interesting? Well, you should sign up for this course that he has coming up. Way to go, Bailey. All right. The next fundamental that often will come up as I'm working with clients is to calculate your markup. There are many ways to do this. Fact. There's many ways to do this. No matter how you go about calculating your markup, there's two numbers that you definitely always need to have, no matter how you approach this. Number one, you need to be really clear. I shouldn't say always. I'll avoid using absolutes. You definitely, the majority of the time when you calculate your markup, need to be very clear with what your overhead expenses are. with what your overhead expenses are. How much every month or over the course of the year are you going to be spending on overhead expenses? When you look closely at your P&L statement, when you plan a budget for the year, you should have a number there. Sometimes that number might be $240,000. And oftentimes your overhead expense should include a reasonable salary for the owner. Include that in your overhead expenses. And the other thing we need to do is, what is our goal for net profit? So oftentimes we're going to be aiming for an 8, 9, 10, 11, 12% net profit. Okay, so get very clear with what your overhead expenses are and what your net profit is. Oftentimes, it's not unusual for your overhead expenses to be 15, 18, 20% of your overall income. That's a margin number, by the way. We'll get into that next. And your net profit goal of, let's say, 8, 10%. Okay. Overhead expense could be more than that if you have more overhead, if you have a showroom, if you have designer, etc. Okay. So we need to calculate our markup. And what I'll share is volume-based markup. It's interesting because I see that Gerald was commenting on this, so he's watching this. And Gerald's going to be replying back to me with all these questions I have about capacity-based markup because I'm looking to learn more about that. But volume-based, we need to have a total sales goal for the year. We have our overhead expense number. We have our net profit goal. And by doing a calculation on that, it will spit out what our markup needs to be. For super deep approach to that, if you buy Michael Stone's book, Markup and Profit, he talks about that and kind of the calculation. But this divided by this spits out what your markup needs to be. And there's a couple ways to calculate it. Okay. We need to get clear with what our markup is. Everybody's markup is different because it's based on your particular business. But you can calculate it. You can know what it needs to be. It is not, well, my markup is based on what I think I can sell it for. My markup is based because I heard my competitor does this. My markup is based because I heard years ago that this is the way we do it. Not a good answer. Your markup is calculated based on your particular business and numbers. Okay. So another fundamental is to be able to calculate your markup. Yeah, Michael, 30% overhead is not uncommon either. Good. Okay. The next thing that we need to know as far as fundamentals go is to understand this somewhat complicated, tricky thing called markup and margin. Markup and margin. Okay. There's a difference between markup and margin. The reason that the majority of remodelers calculate based on markup is because it's simple. It's clear. It's easy to calculate and price your work based on markup. Calculating it based on margin is a little bit more complicated formula. Okay, so I teach pricing based on markup because I'm trying to take people that don't know their numbers and make it so that they can be clear and confident in their numbers. And to me as a coach, it's been the thing that's allowed light bulbs to go off and turn unprofitable remodelers into very profitable remodelers. That's why I do it, because it works. It's not the only way to do it by any means, but I've got years and years of experience doing it and transforming people from not knowing to knowing. Okay. And there's other ways to do it, but you need to understand the difference between markup and margin. I'll share a screen real quick, even though sometimes this makes StreamYard not happy. But I will do it, and I'm going to click screen share. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to pull up this. What you're looking at here is just a simple little table that has in the first column margin, and in the second column markup, and the kind of the multiplier there. So as an example, if I have a 33% markup, that equals a 25% gross profit margin. What have you guys heard over the years? Remodelers need to be at 67% markup, right? You've heard that. 67% markup equals a 40% gross profit margin. Let me pause there. Let's play with that number for a second. total sales minus cost of goods sold equals gross profit. If you have a 40% gross profit margin, it means you have a 60% cost of goods sold percentage. Those two numbers add up together to equal 100%. Your cost of goods sold percentage, which is your number that comes up when you do cost of goods sold divided by your total sales number, spits out a percentage. That's margin. And those two numbers, cost of goods sold and gross profit, add up to 100. Now, what's helpful here is if you have a 40% gross profit, that means you have 40% of your total sales to still pay overhead expenses and net profit. If you are a very lean remodeling business where you're doing, let's say, $1.5 million of revenue, and you have a $300,000 overhead number, okay, that means that your percentage of overhead is 20%. Follow me here, okay? So $1.5 million remodeling business with $300,000 of overhead expenses. If you had a 40% gross profit margin, you would pay out of that 40% your 20% of overhead expenses, and that would leave you with a net profit of 20%. It would leave you with a net profit of $300,000. Okay, we need to just keep looking at examples here. If I have a 43% markup right here, you're looking at, then I have a 30% gross profit margin. Now I have 30% to still pay my overhead expenses and my net profit out of. Okay, so the reason we use markup predominantly is because it's clear, it's simple, it reduces risks and errors, I found, and a lot of people found. But we need to understand how markup and margin play together, because when we look at the P&L statement and when we look at our percentages that get spit out when we do our job costing, those are margin numbers. Okay, so every markup has a corresponding margin. Every margin has a corresponding markup. And you just need a cheat sheet like I'm pulling up here that shows the difference between markup and margin. Type in markup and margin table, and you'll find something very similar to this. Okay, so when I think of fundamentals of knowing your numbers, one of these big things is we need to understand what have I said so far? Profit and loss statement. We need to organize our profit and loss statement so that it's organized properly. We need to calculate and understand our markup. We need to understand the difference between markup and margin. If this is rocking your world and you're already liking it, and you're like, crap, I got to know more about this. Spend $14.97. Spend $1,497 on my course that I'm going to be launching on April 21st. I'll just say it. I'll guarantee that you will make 10 times 10 times 10 times the investment on that over the years. If you are confused by this stuff right now, if you don't know your numbers, I'm going to teach you how. We're going to calculate. I'm going to give you confidence and clarity. You're going to be way more profitable. Okay. That was a little bit of a right hook at it. Okay. Do you estimate on markup or margin? The great majority of people that calculate it, that I teach to estimate on markup, Jim. It's easier. It's clearer. That's what I teach. That's what Michael Stone teaches. That's what a lot of people have taught over the years. Again, the way Michael Stone describes it, calculating it based on markup is a complexity of 1 out of 10. Calculated based on margin, it's just a different formula. It's division. It's this and that. It's just more complicated. Okay. Whose mind was just blown? Somebody's mind was just blown. Sean. Oh, Sean, I hope you're liking this, my man. I hope you're liking this. Okay, good. A remodeler margin should be determined by their net profit goals and overhead expenses. Should not be plucked out of the ether. Correct. That's exactly what I said, right? When you know your overhead expense total and you know your net profit goal, your margin or the equivalent markup can be calculated based on that. Absolutely. Somebody said, great topic. Who was that? Hi, Steve Cunningham, former remodeler of the year for NAHP. $1 million gross revenue business with $300K in overhead running a 30% margin is treading water. Correct. A $1.5 million gross with $300K in overhead with a 40% gross profit margin is doing real nice, right? It's just math, people. Once you understand the difference between markup and margin, once you understand exactly what your overhead expenses are, what your net profit goal is, and on the volume-based markup, you have a total sales goal, the numbers spit themselves out. The risk with volume-based markup is if you've calculated your markup based on this amount of overhead expense, this amount of net profit, and this amount of sales, let's say 1.5 million, and you only produce 1.2 million, Houston, we have a problem. You will not make as much net profit in that case. And once the net profit is used up, now we're in the negative. Okay. So again, you got to keep wrestling with this. You got to keep working to understand it. Hopefully my little review of this here of markup and margin and how this all plays together is helpful. Some might say mind-blowing, hopefully in a good way, Sean, hopefully in a good way. And I'll share, so we talked about P&L statement. We talked about correcting your P&L. We talked about how to calculate markup. I did a little teaching on the difference between markup and margin. I'll share two more things in the last remaining minutes. The next thing is, once you have your P&L statement organized and you understand it, you can go into QuickBooks and set up an overall business budget. The way that we're going to cover that in the course. The basics of that is you go in and the overhead expenses should be very clear. You go to the advertising line item, which is usually the first because it starts with an A. Get it? It starts with an A. And you look at that number from last year and you say, okay, I spent $11,000 last year on advertising. Am I going to spend more this year? Am I going to spend less this year? What did I spend it on again? Oh, cool. And then you plug in a number for this upcoming year of what you're going to spend in advertising based on your strategy. Up, down, about the same, etc. Go through all of your overhead expense line items and put a budget number in there for the year. With me so far? Cool. Figure out what your net profit goal for the year. And then oftentimes what I teach is set a total sales goal and plug that in at the top. Think about that. Look at that hard. Look at the last couple of years. What can you and your team produce? What is realistic? Be conservative, not aggressive with it. Plug a number in there for total sales. And then what I teach is when you get into the cost of goods sold section, you do not need to go line by line by line by line. What you need to do is say, well, based on what I have here, and I have a markup of, let's say, 1.47, a 1.47 markup leads to a 32% gross profit margin. And that leaves 68% for cost of goods sold. So I'll take my total sales times 0.68, and there's your cost of goods sold budget. That means that you need to sell all of your work at 47%. And more importantly, you have to actually bring it in at 47%. Oftentimes, because of slippage, because you're missing things, because you didn't bring in the project at the actual markup and margin that you sold it at, we have slippage, and that cost of goods sold percentage goes up and your gross profit percentage goes down, which leaves you less dollars to pay for overhead expenses and net profit. Okay. So another know your numbers fundamentals is we want to set up a business budget. And the last thing that is just a really solid fundamental, and there's probably more, but what I've covered so far is what I'm digging into and going to teach and hold your butt accountable to get done in the course that I have coming up, is job costing. Yeah, I've heard you say that before, Kyle. You talk about job costing a lot. Okay, so if you say that, if Kyle talks about it all the time, if pretty much every other show I'm talking about job costing, if a bunch of posts are talking about job costing, and if I make my living working with remodelers, helping them make more money in their remodeling business, and I am obsessed with job costing, that should make you go, Things that make you go, Isn't that like things that make you go, That should make you pause and go, why is this business coach that only works with remodelers constantly barking about job costing? It's because it is where the rubber stinking hits the road. You want to be a better estimator? You want to know if your estimating is accurate? Get into your job costs. You want to be a better project manager? Get into your job costs. You want to be more profitable remodeler? You want to be a better salesperson? Get into your job costing. You need to be able to say, I am expecting this amount in gross profit, and my actual is this amount. It is doable. There are many ways that you can go about it. There are key pieces of information that you need, and you need to make sure that you can tell me and you can tell yourself, here's my expected gross profit and here's my actual. It takes work to get your job costing system set up. and it is worth it. It's the thing that's going to make you more money in the next 10 years than anything else. What about markup? Well, markup's going to help too when you calculate your proper markup. But job costing can make you tens of thousands of dollars more in gross profit this year. If you're not doing it and you start paying attention to it, you're going to estimate better. You're going to stop forgetting things. You're going to project manage and light a fire on your team's butt a little bit more. You're going to more confidently sell and say, you know what, I'm charging X amount and doggone it, we're worth every penny. I need to sell at this markup and margin, and I'm going to do it. Okay. So that's the other biggie, is know your numbers. You've got to know your job costing. Cool. So that's what I wanted to cover, my friends, today. I wanted to talk about comparing ourselves to others and the advantages and danger of doing that. We started that at the top, and hopefully that's a helpful thing. We need to stay in the moment. We need to make sure that we are serving the person in front of us and not being distracted by what's coming up or what's going on later, but just wherever you are, be there. And then I shared all of these know your number fundamentals. Part of the reason is because I have a kick butt course that I'm doing, that I'm going to walk you through this. You're going to send me your stinking homework. I'm going to give you feedback. I'm going to poke and prod and push to make sure that at the end of these 6 weeks, you are going to know your numbers. And I just went through all the stuff that we're going to cover, except we're going to go in detail and we're going to deal with your numbers. It's limited to 15 remodelers so that I have time to go back and forth with you in between times. It's a fraction of the cost of my one-on-one coaching, and sign up if you're interested. Bailey put the link. She's probably going to put the link again in here too. And if you're listening to this on the recording, just go to remodelyourmarketing.com, click on financials, and you'll see the upcoming class. Last question is, Jim says, do you apply a macro, the macro percentage for the business, to each individual estimate before it goes out? I think what you're saying there, if you're doing a volume-based markup, if you're doing a volume-based markup where you have properly calculated what your markup needs to be, do you apply that to the entire cost of the project? And yes, you do. The majority of my remodeling clients take the total cost of the project times 1.40, 1.45, 1.52, 1.72. Yes, some people have 1.72. And they do that calculation, and then that's their selling price. There's a lot of different ways to do this, right? Yeah, I mean, Michael, know your numbers. That's David Gershel. That's Brian Kaplan uses that for his course, right? Knowing your numbers is something that's constantly used, and the phrase that's used. Jim, you nailed the problem with volume markup. Yeah, Michael, you probably had to bite your tongue a little bit as I've been going through this. But here's the thing: there are more. What I just described is the thing, and I'll end with this. What I just described is what I'm confident saying the majority of you need to get down. It is solid, clear teaching. It's what has been in our industry for years and years and years, and it works. Yes, there's some problems with it. Yes, if you're running into issues with clients wanting to break it down, that's a potential problem. I mentioned the potential problem of if you base it on volume and your volume is not coming in at the amount you produce, that's a problem. There's problems with capacity-based markup. There's problems with a variety of them. You know, what you see on the remodelers community that Michael teaches is something that Rainey Blair, one of my clients, has embraced. It's working beautifully for them. You know, and it's worth, there's two things here. It's worth looking into and seeing how Michael teaches it. It's worth it. But a lot of people, and Michael and I might disagree on this, that skiing analogy, we're going back and forth on it. I would argue that I'm trying to take people that don't know their numbers at all and get them profitable, solid, clear. And as you graduate out of that, you might say, you know what? I kind of like this more transparent model. What if I take that big fat markup and break that down into a line item that says, here's how much I charge for permitting. Here's how much I charge for material procurement. Here's what I charge for project management on site. Here's what I charge for accounting and bookkeeping and this and that. Here's my overhead expenses. Here's my profit. So when I show this to a client, they're seeing all of the hard costs, and then they see these different line items that total up to my markup. I hope I did that justice, Michael, right? That's another way to do it. And I think it's something that you can consider. It's something that you can think about. But we got to walk before we run. A lot of you need to walk before you can run. And we'll keep talking about it. We'll keep talking about it. And Michael, go ahead and comment of what in Jim's statement of, do you apply the overall percentage to each individual line item before it goes out, share a little bit about, what you see the problem of that is. Even if you don't show it to the client, you benefit from showing it to yourself. Sure. But go ahead and comment on that, and then I got to get scooting. We are 7 minutes past, which I don't do on the Remodels on the Rise show. Hope this was helpful, my friends. I will catch you in like 11 days on the next Remodelers on the Rise. We'll be spring breaking next week. We're not even going anywhere warm. We're going up to northern Michigan. It should be lovely, but it's probably going to be in the 40s. Michael, I did have these at the ready today. Michael sent me some 100-year-old preserved duck eggs. And I haven't had the courage to eat them yet. The kids have just shot them down. But they are supposedly good if I just leave them out until August 24, 2021. I will eat them. I will do it on an upcoming show. And there we go. All right, peeps. Catch you later. You're welcome, Jim.